Hello, this is Pat Lynch. I'm joined with Brendan Connell, Kieran O'Keefe, and this is As the World Turns or Burns, a political commentary show that we run every other week until we get canceled, so stay tuned. But joining us also behind the board is none other than producer
Cheyenne.
That's right. Yes, she's there and she's making the magic happen. And so, topics for today, we have just like what the DOGE is going on. Okay, so we got that, and Gaza, Ukraine, and anything else.
I think that's it.
All right. What you guys want to tackle? Gaza, Ukraine first? Is just or which one or? What do you think?
We could start with Ukraine, because that's most prominent in the news right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we got peace talks going on, I guess, in Saudi Arabia, of all places.
Is his historical precedent? How long ago has it been when here is a country that has been attacked by another country, and yet that country is not in the negotiation for peace talks? It's a superpower meeting with another superpower to basically determine the fate of a sovereign nation. I think there's probably somewhere in history where people, these superpowers carved out, spheres of influence or whatever, but it just seems like it seems so out of balance to me.
It isn't a perfect precedent. It's a little bit different, but it's reminded me a bit of the Munich Agreement in 1938,
right?
Which was when Hitler wanted what's called the Sudetenland, which is a region of Czechoslovakia that was part of Czechoslovakia but was primarily ethnically German. Mm-hmm. And Hitler wants to supposedly bring all these Germans into the Third Reich. And he demanded this region. It looked like he was going to try to take it by force. That's when Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of the UK, went to Munich and met with Hitler and also the leaders of Italy, Benito Mussolini, and the leader of France. And they sat down, France, Italy, Germany, and Britain, and discussed what to do about the Sudetenland. Right. Czechoslovakia was not invited. And the ultimate decision was that Hitler would get the Sudetenland and promise not to go after anything else. And that agreement lasted about 6 months, and then Hitler invaded the rest of Czechoslovakia. Yeah. So that's what it made me think of, and that the Czechs were not invited. They had to give up their territory without their consent, because if they hadn't accepted the agreement, they hadn't sort of gone along with it, they would have had no backing to help them against Germany.
Yeah. And so based on that historical precedent, why?
I was hoping there was going to be a different example to bring up. It's not a good parallel.
Yeah.
That's just what I've thought of in the past week, as I see like Russia and the U.S. making these decisions. Europe's not even involved. Europe has given basically as much as we have to Ukraine to back Ukraine against Russia. They have no involvement in the negotiations either. So it's not a great look on the international scene.
Yeah, and so then what I hear is that it's that. Okay, Russia, well, at least the Trump proposal going in is what they get to keep Crimea and their occupied land in Ukraine, and then just promise pinky swear not to advance any further, and that Ukraine cannot enter NATO. Is that kind of it?
Russia cares a lot about that. Yeah. So nothing, I think, final has been agreed to at this point, but those are some of the terms being discussed right now. And part of where the U.S. has been criticized is that when Pete Hegseth gave a speech, and I think it was Munich, last week, he basically said that Ukraine was going to have to be realistic about what it was going to get out of the peace talks, about the fact that it was going to have to give up some land, which is probably true on paper. The idea of Ukraine recovering, like Crimea, for example, is a little bit fanciful. But I think the criticism was that you still want to have that as leverage when you sit down and negotiate with the Russians. You don't want to give that up before you even begin negotiating. And Trump is spending a lot of time going after Zelensky on Twitter and Truth Social.
Yeah.
Says his approval rating's 4%, when it's actually like 57%. But close enough, I guess.
And he's a dictator.
He's a dictator
because they were suspended elections because Russia is bombing them and Russia's invading them. So technical details. Just what is it? It was kind of comical in 2016 when it was like Russia on everything, and you kind of was there influence, but did they get Trump elected? I don't know. I just found that hard to believe. But then here you are now in 2025, and it seems like Trump and his team are just basically, going and using Russian talking points. The dictator, all this. That's just Ukraine started the war. That was another one that it's like, what?
That's the stuff I don't quite understand. I can try to give some hot takes here. I mean,
we're all for hot takes. Cheyenne, are you for hot takes? Yeah, she said yes.
Yeah, I have no problem opening up discussions and talking with Russia, because sometimes people will kind of fall into the trap of like no compromise is like the most patriotic thing to do.
Right.
We don't negotiate with terrorists was like a whole other thing, like the war on terror. So I actually think it's great we're at least talking for the first time since the invasion of mainland Ukraine. We're at least talking with Russia. I think talking is seldom going to be a bad thing. Also, I mean, like maybe like this is what I'm thinking is if we haven't made any final agreement yet, right? So even if there is some sort of peace deal, we don't know what's going to be in it. And you would imagine that Ukraine's going to have to sign and consent to that peace deal because they're a direct belligerent in the conflict, or a victim of the conflict, however you want to phrase it. But you could look back. I think if you look back at like other conflicts, I've been trying to like look at like the Balkan Wars in the 90s, and like we had the Dayton Peace Accords, and the belligerents in that conflict signed the ultimate peace treaty, but it was primarily driven by major powers, United States and Europe. So it's maybe not totally abnormal to have two major powers. This is the reality of world politics, Russia and the US, that at least get the ball rolling. And like, I was just trying to give the benefit of the doubt, like maybe Ukraine, then once we kind of get the ball rolling and get the train on the tracks to bring on Ukraine, bring on NATO, bring on Western Europe. What I don't understand though is why would you talking with Russia and trying to be cordial with Russia is one thing, but why would you be like so antagonistic towards Ukraine?
Right.
And especially why would you do that publicly? And as Kieran was just saying, like almost like giving away your hand and here's what we're willing to actually already do, rather than using it as something at the bargaining table. Because it is a balance. You want to be able to compromise. You're going to have to give Russia something if you're serious about ending the war, but you don't want to give them more than you have to, obviously. Right. So that's what's kind of confused me is why be so antagonistic towards Ukraine? Yeah. Why blame them from starting the war when they clearly didn't?
Well, just a theory, like a quasi hot take, but is it? Trump is real big on getting a deal. He's the deal. He's the art of the deal, and so so who's at the table? It's Putin and him. So he's trying to get this deal. I'm sure in his mind he thinks he's going to be up for a Nobel Prize. Between that and turning the Gaza into the next Riviera, but he's got that in mind that he wants the deal, so he's kind of doing these Russian talking points to kind of bring Russia closer to him, so he can get this deal done. Does any of that make sense?
It could be kind of like a egotistical.
Negotiate. It's just negotiating. It's like I don't think he has a core set of beliefs around a lot of this, and it's more how do I get the deal closed, get the transaction made? I'm sure part of it too is he sees normalizing relations with Russia is money, right? So there's oil, there's minerals, there's all I was hearing that Russia would open up, access to a bunch of oil fields that they have, and now that just helps bring gas prices down. I'm just thinking that is it being approached in a business terms, and Ukraine's just kind of one of the pieces on the chessboard that you just move around.
It could be. Yeah. I don't know if you want to chime in.
I say he seems like he's very interested in minerals for some reason, because apparently he was trying to get Zelensky to sign off mineral rights in Ukraine to the U.S., which is strange. But he's also, I think, has that interest in Greenland. And then Justin Trudeau a few weeks ago, and he's talking to some Canadian business leaders, that he thinks Trump wants Canada because of its mineral wealth. Right. So something about minerals and Trump, I don't know what the mindset is there. Maybe it's just wealth, but
no pun intended.
Coincidentally, I was teaching about rare earth metals.
There you go.
Which Ukraine has in my globalization course today. And ironically, the World Trade Organization, which is very hated by the Trump administration, they're actually to thank for our access to rare earth metals that are being traded out of China.
Yeah.
So not to sidetrack us too much, but it is kind of funny.
But is it that he just wants to close this deal because he just that's promises made, promises kept. You keep hearing that, and so you have to surrender a little land. Okay, Russia is promising not to attack. I believe him.
I think to some degree he wants to be like the anti-Obama and the anti-Biden in his foreign policy. If you go back to his first term, he made a really big deal about trying to work with North Korea, meeting with Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, that's right.
I think when he met Obama in the White House during the transition, Obama told him that North Korea was going to be the hardest challenge he had as president. Right. And I think Obama no president has managed to solve the North Korea problem. And so Trump wanted to be the president to solve it when Obama couldn't.
Right.
And likewise, Obama had the Iran agreement, and Trump tore that up. And then Biden wasn't able to stop the war in Ukraine or stop the war in Gaza. And so I guess Trump wants to be able to take credit for doing something that Biden was unable to do. So I don't know. It could just be like a credit thing. But one of the challenges too is like, okay, let's say the U.S. and Russia come to some sort of agreement in these talks in Saudi Arabia. Maybe Russia agrees to it, but then what if Ukraine doesn't? Or let's say Ukraine even does, and then what's to make Russia respect the new boundaries of Ukraine going forward, and not to say that Russia is going to invade Ukraine again in another 5 years or whatever. What makes it a permanent peace? Yeah,
essentially, I can't see anything unless Ukraine buys in, and okay, kind of where's this end? There's a couple scenarios. It goes according to what we think it's going like right now. That'll end where? That Russia keeps all the occupied territory?
That would be my guess. Crimea, I think, is gone. Crimea already is much different than the rest of Ukraine. It's much more Russian than the rest of Ukraine.
Right.
So Crimea, I don't think is coming back. And some of those eastern areas, too, that Russia has occupied do have a lot of people who speak Russian. Linguistic identity is not always the same as ethnic identity, but there's a lot of Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine. And in the far eastern part of Ukraine and the Donbass, the war there has really been going on for over a decade now. That goes back to the initial Russian invasion in 2014. So my guess would be it'll probably be something along the lines of each side keeps the territory they roughly have right now, more or less, maybe some small changes. But I think Russia has more leverage than Ukraine does at the moment, because if talks result in something, it's likely to be more favorable to Russia than Ukraine would like, given, I think, the approach of the Trump administration and Trump's weird affinity for Putin for whatever reason. Yeah. And then if Ukraine says no, that might lead to the war continuing. But is the Trump administration going to continue to back Ukraine if Ukraine doesn't take the deal that's on the table? And my guess would be no. And then you're dependent on the Europeans. There's going to be war fatigue among European nations. Like Germany's about to have an election, and do you want to continue with giving money? You probably have to increase how much money you're giving to Ukraine and resources you're giving to Ukraine, given that the U.S. backs out of it, and that might not be popular in Germany and other European nations. So, and the way the war has been going, Russia's not crushing it, but they have made progress in the past year, and they have more people, they have a bigger military, they have a bigger economy. even though they're economically isolated from much of the world. So I just think Russia has more cards in the deck right now than Ukraine does, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And I think NATO membership is not, it's not going to happen anytime soon for Ukraine. That would probably be in a peace deal. There'd be maybe some promise on Russia's part to not invade Ukraine. And so you take that for what it's worth. But NATO membership, I mean, it's a whole another topic. I mean, I actually think the West misplayed it before the onset of the war. I would have actually made the promise to say Ukraine's not joining NATO. I don't think there's anything in NATO's charter that prohibits that. People talk about the open door policy is what it's called in NATO's charter. But if you read it closely, the door is open. It's not in those words, but the door is more or less open to countries as long as it's in the interests of the European states, the European members of NATO. Right. Ukraine joining NATO right now is not in the interests of European members. We don't have to let them in because they happen to be a country that's in Europe that's not in NATO right now. So,
but they're a buffer to all the remaining NATO nations. So if you if you leave them unaffiliated, that just doesn't give a pathway for Russia to just move through, and now they're knocking at Poland's door.
Not accepting NATO or not accepting Ukraine into NATO to me is not an acknowledgement that it's okay to invade a country, right? That you don't need NATO to understand that is right, territorial integrity that's laid out in the UN Charter. But I guess from where I stand, like what I was thinking was it's not too much to ask to say to avoid a war, right? But I'm talking about before the war even started. Right. Okay, I maybe understand actually where Putin's coming from. You've got NATO on your doorstep. We've got NATO missiles, nuclear weapons parked in Turkey and Italy and these other NATO countries. I would maybe feel a little bit, kind of nervous myself if you see NATO expanding. And I'm saying this at the risk of being a Russian apologist. I understand this, but I would have said, okay, but don't invade Ukraine, and we will promise they won't join NATO. And then maybe Putin invades Ukraine anyway, but then you at least know what you're dealing with. You're not then dealing with someone that's rational and giving you legitimate reasons about why, then you're getting into the more, we're invading Ukraine because we view it as a part of Russia. It has nothing to do with NATO. So that was kind of my position before the war even started. And now the way I view it is, again, if you can create peace, that seems like a small little thing you could compromise over at this point. But again, what I've noticed with NATO is, to be against NATO is to almost be unpatriotic.
Yeah.
So I've gotten chewed out for giving these views before by people that really, really love NATO, and to not like NATO means.
Well, I was going to ask Kieran what are the odds Brendan's filing for a job in Washington, D.C. for the Just a thought.
Or Moscow. Or Moscow.
Either one,
What I've heard floated about a little bit, I guess Britain and France have discussed this, is possibly you have this agreement and then you leave NATO troops in Ukraine. It's kind of like a tripwire that Russia knows if they try to invade Ukraine, they're going to clash with NATO troops, and then all of NATO will be forced to fight. Which it sounds like only Britain and France have expressed interest in that. The other NATO states just don't want to get involved.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say like why Russia invaded, because there is, the expansion of NATO like during the Bush years really did bring NATO much closer to Russia, which is a threat to Russia in some ways. Not a crazy way for Russia to feel.
Well, why is it a threat? NATO is never they have never attacked any nation, and the only threat is for Russian aggression that now they are facing. I forget how many NATO nations there are now. You have this formidable army that will strike back, and if Ukraine had been a part of NATO, that would have been basically a world war.
Yeah, I think it's viewed as a threat because NATO is established to control the Soviet Union, to control Russia. And a lot of the states that have joined NATO in the last 20 years were part of the Soviet Union. The Baltic states, for example, were part of the Soviet Union. There was Georgia expressed interest in joining NATO, and that was around the time that Putin invaded Georgia in 2008. But like whether or not that's the reason Russia invaded or not, it's hard to say because there was that. If you guys saw that interview a couple of years ago now, where Tucker Carlson went to Moscow and he interviewed Putin. It was just like a ridiculous. It wasn't even an interview. It was more just like a Putin monologue.
Right.
But in that monologue, I mean, I think he talked about NATO a little bit, but there's also like this deep-seated sense of like Russian national identity that includes Ukraine that I think goes well beyond NATO, because Russia's cultural origins really go back to what's called Kievan Rus. That's where actually the term Russia comes from.
Yeah.
Who are like Scandinavians, probably Scandinavians, who made their way into what is now Russia and ended up sort of merging with the Slavic peoples in what's now Western Russia. And Kievan Rus was sort of the cultural and political antecedent to the modern Russian state.
Right.
And so that's based out of Kiev, Kievan Rus. And so Russian national identity like sort of sees Ukraine as part of Russia. And that's really what Putin was saying in that interview with Carlson. And he said this at different points too, that Ukraine doesn't have the right to exist as an independent state. And Ukrainian nationalism wasn't really a thing until the 19th century, which is true for a lot of nationalisms. And it was in the 19th century when Ukrainians began thinking about themselves as something that was different than being Russian. And despite that, Ukraine was still part of Russia or part of the Soviet Union until the early 90s when it voted to break away. So I think there's the NATO element to it, but there is also like the ideological and I think sense of Russian national identity that thinks that Ukraine shouldn't exist and that it should be incorporated into a larger Russia.
Well, I've also read, that part of it, depending on how much Russia gets in return, that there'd be a concerted effort of removing Zelensky and kind of Russia trying very hard to get a pro-Russian president back in power like they had, before Zelensky. That you heard that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why they don't want to have an election right now is that they're afraid Putin will
engineer it.
Whoever is the pro-Russian candidate to try to defeat Zelensky or whoever else is running.
And then you basically have a puppet state that more or less is like then it's kind of an occupied territory to a degree.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the reason why Putin is willing to tolerate Ukraine without invading it for a while there is that it had a lot of pro-Russian leaders of Ukraine, and then that changed in 2014, which led to the invasion, the initial invasion.
Yeah.
Which the U.S. played a role in. Sorry I could keep giving these, but we
have our contrarian here.
So it's a major power thing. Both sides do it. They want to very like the Cold War, right? It's just trying to put your a regime that's friendly to your interest in power. So
with all this with Russia and NATO, one of the other talking points, like Hegseth was referring to, is pulling U.S. troop support out of Europe and kind of a whole. I guess he wants to put them all on the border or something. I don't know, but it's he says against China. I don't know what that would even mean. But it seemed pretty significant that there'd be a much diminished U.S. military presence across Europe.
In Eastern Europe or Western Europe? Or?
I think they just call it all Europe. So I know Germany. It's there's a big presence, but like further east, I don't know exactly where that is, but all of it, then all of a sudden you just see that they're basically Europe. You have to defend yourself, and good luck, NATO.
Yeah, I'd read something about maybe removing the troops that I think are in the Baltic states right now. That Biden had increased the troop deployment there in the aftermath of the invasion to sort of provide, I guess, moral support to the Baltic states to ward off Russia. But yeah, that's definitely a reorientation of the Trump policy, is to try to make Europe take more responsibility for its own defense.
Because you're cheating us. It's well known.
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole issue with funding NATO, which Trump is not the only president to have complained about that. There are a lot of presidents who complained about that. Trump has made a much bigger deal about it, of trying to get all NATO countries up to, was it 2% of
it was 2 or 3, and I never knew that until he came on the scene, but he made, he got the point across.
To be clear, it's not in the charter. It's not actually a rule. This is started as an informal commitment, and then it became like a verbal pledge,
Yeah.
which is different than the status of enshrining it into
Yeah,
a
yeah.
binding document. But yeah, it's 2% of your GDP on military spending. So it's also not like paying dues to NATO.
Yeah.
It's just about just spend money on the military. That's what it is. And then if you look, I mean, yeah, more countries than not are not clearing the 2% threshold. So Trump has a point there. Obama had a point because he made this argument. Bush had a point. So it's not just a Trump thing, but yeah, just to be clear, it's actually not a rule though. It's just a verbal pledge.
Yeah. One thing out of all this, will Putin ever come up for war crimes?
He already did, but will he
Has
be
he?
like
Yeah.
or actually it might be crimes of aggression, but
Yeah.
at the ICC he's got a warrant out for him, the International Criminal Court.
Okay.
The International Criminal Court though is not they do not have a police force, they don't have a military, they're not a world government, so they can issue warrants all they want, but ultimately it's up to state governments to turn over Putin to the ICC in The Hague, which is not going to happen.
Yeah, because I just had that real terrible feeling like that this gets a January 6th whitewash, and somehow it all's forgiven, and we were boys will be boys, just had a little kerfuffle here or there, but
I think the only way he's gonna end up being held accountable for invading Ukraine is if he's overthrown, which is not very likely.
Yeah,
I thought maybe at first, like if the war dragged on for a long time, just a constant death toll in Ukraine would eventually hurt his popularity. But it seems like he has pretty genuine popularity among a lot of Russians. To view him as like a tough leader that's standing up to the West that's bullying Russia, and is trying to bring back Ukraine into Russia as it belongs and historically has been part of Russia.
Yeah.
So I don't think he's going to be overthrown. That would be the only case where I think he'd be held accountable.
Yeah. Oh well. Well, you want to move to the Riviera of the Mideast, Gaza?
Sure.
Talk about Gaza.
Oh my. Well, who wants to tackle that? As far as us, the U.S. taking over, or just kind of moving the Palestinians out and then just kind of rebuilding Gaza. It's like I'm sure there's a historical precedent, in terms of like, maybe not, but it just it's like a World War II rebuild in a way, but
there's historical precedent in that region. Like that area was largely Palestinian until in the early 20th century.
Yeah.
The Jewish population of Palestine, like under the Ottoman Empire, was not very big until the late 19th century. I think people think of that area. So one of the things people often say is that this issue between Israel, Palestine, has been going on for thousands of years.
Right.
And it really isn't true. Like it's much more of a modern development. And you want to trace the more immediate origins, it dates to the late 19th century. If you went back to Palestine in, say, 1880, Jews made up a tiny percentage of the population. It was primarily Muslim, Arab, Palestinian, and then some Christians and a very small Jewish population that did date back to the time of antiquity. But the Jewish diaspora had taken place in the centuries after the life of Jesus, and led to Jews spreading across Europe from Palestine. But anyway, then you have the Zionist movement, where a lot of Jews began moving into to Palestine. The British invite Jews to move to Palestine after they take the region over from the Ottoman Empire after World War I. And then the movement of Jews into Palestine turned into like a flood after World War II and the Holocaust, where Jews were displaced, and there's a great sense that Jews needed their own country to protect themselves, needed their own state to protect themselves because of what had happened in Europe in World War II with the Holocaust. So you have all these Jews moving in from Europe who were fleeing persecution, and in the process they ended up displacing Palestinians. Like if you go back to like the map that the United Nations drew of where you'd have a Palestinian state and an Israeli state in 1948. Those lines are like way different than the borders are today, because in 1948 the new state of Israel basically seized a bunch of territory from from the Palestinians and expelled them in what the Palestinians called the Nakba. And so that area has already been ethnically cleansed in a way. And the area that remains primarily Palestinian, part of that, Gaza, could be ethnically cleansed if Trump's plan were to go forward.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's an exaggeration to call it ethnic cleansing if you're going to take 2 million people and tell them they have to get out and go to Egypt or Jordan or wherever else.
Well, ethnic cleansing usually ends with, like a genocide, doesn't it? Rather than just a forced removal.
I think ethnically cleansing is more about forced removal, and death is usually part of forced removal, but it isn't
the ultimate forced removal.
Yeah, there are different. They're related, but not the same. I would say.
Yeah. So, is this what's going to happen there? It just seems so far fetched to me, and it's like the Trump administration is trying to pride itself that it's that it's no more never-ending wars, no more conflict zones, and then it's like we're going to put ourselves in one of the biggest tinder boxes on the planet.
Yeah, I think he did help the peace negotiations along. The Biden administration had totally failed, I think, to come to any kind of ceasefire. But Trump, I don't think it's a coincidence that the ceasefire took place as Trump was about to come into office. I think he did play a role in helping come to this initial ceasefire, which surprised some people, and actually was probably pleasantly surprising to some people on the left. But his plan for a post-war Gaza is going to be unpopular with many different groups.
Yeah.
It's going to be unpopular obviously with Palestinians, but also with Egypt and Jordan, who do not want to take in a bunch of Palestinian refugees.
Where do you put 2 million people?
It's a little over 2 million people in Gaza, yeah.
Americans aren't going to want to take them. I should attend my colloquium tomorrow, and that's going to be one of the themes. But,
no, but it's just, it's just such or was it the plan that they just move out and then let us rebuild and make it, big and gorgeous, and then they can move back? Or is it just Israel's trying to just one more, fortify its border more or less, so that they never have, another attack from from Hamas or any other group?
Yeah, I don't know what Israel's plan is. I was kind of wondering actually when Trump said if Gaza, that the U.S. wanted to take over Gaza, if that would actually upset some Israelis who feel like they want Israel to take over Gaza instead potentially, but it doesn't seem that's been the reaction. So I don't know what is going to happen. The idea of U.S. taking over Gaza though seems ridiculous, and I don't know how serious Trump is about it. It's a little hard to say with him sometimes. But I don't think that's going to have support with literally anybody outside of, I guess, some of his supporters in the US.
But what about Israel taking over Gaza? I think he would be fine with that as well, wouldn't he? He seems that he's a very big supporter, and there was so much hand wringing in all the Biden people, trying to be sympathetic, empathetic to both sides, and that you had Israel was attacked, it was brutal, it was horrific, but their response was also brutal and horrific, and they just were trying to dance on a thread, and I don't think Trump's he's never going to be that nuanced, and so is he fine with Israel just taking over? Reclaiming the land.
He wouldn't have an issue with that. I kind of wonder if Israel at some point will try to annex the West Bank while Trump is in office.
Yeah.
But Israel withdrew from Gaza. Gaza is a little bit different than the West Bank, where the West Bank, the area that's west of the Jordan River, but not officially part of Israel, which would be part of Palestine. That area, there are tons of Israeli settlements.
They keep adding more and more.
Yeah. So that area, you have, I get the number wrong. I want to say it's 500,000 or something Israelis who have moved into the West Bank. Gaza had Israeli settlements, but Israel agreed to withdraw them in like 2005, 2006,
Yeah.
somewhere around there. So there aren't any Israeli settlements in Gaza. Those have been gone for like 20 years now, unlike the West Bank. So there isn't an Israeli presence in the Gaza Strip as there is in the West Bank. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure if Israel wants it or not. Maybe they do. I don't know about internal Israeli politics regarding the Gaza Strip. But
anything that can just make peace. I mean, they've been on a wartime footing, since the very beginning, and and just they're just looking at some way for safety. I mean, I sympathize with them in that regard. I mean, having something like Hamas right at your, literally right at your border. I mean, you just saw the brutality that they're willing to go to.
Yeah, October 7th was obviously a horrible war crime where you just absolute horrible massacres of civilians, and Hamas stormed across the border into Israel, and all these innocent civilians were massacred, and hostages, and all the hostages haven't survived. So I don't think there's any doubt that Israel have the right to respond in some capacity. But the way they have responded and the consequences that could lead to long term are more controversial and debatable.
Yeah, it's a question of, it relates to what we were talking about in Ukraine. It's, you can't blame people for wanting peace.
Right.
But not all pieces are equal. Peace without, you don't want peace to be, what's the quote? Like, a negative peace is peace without justice. I think that's an MLK quote in a letter from Birmingham jail, which I just taught in class. But, that's kind of, I'd be curious to know too, like, I haven't looked at Israeli public opinion on this issue. There's always going to be probably more like the Netanyahu contingent that's going to be in favor of just expanding, not just maybe taking over Gaza, but the West Bank as well. But I wouldn't be surprised as well if there's a lot of moderate Israelis that also recognize that you can't just do ethnic cleansing. It's so kinda, there's no other way to put it. I don't really have any hot takes for this one.
Well,
will there ever be a Riviera?
I don't know. I think that would be so unpopular. I can't imagine. I'm guessing we won't end up actually going through with it.
Right.
And Egypt and Jordan, this is a very dangerous situation for them because those governments are not very stable right now.
Right.
And those civilians there do not want to take in millions of Palestinian refugees. Those could topple the governments.
Right.
If you saw King Abdullah of Jordan came to D.C. to meet with Trump the other day, and he you can just tell his body language. He does not like Trump's plan at all about Jordan taking in all these refugees who are going to be removed from Gaza. So I think that's a non-starter for some of the Arab countries who are, I think, working in their own way to try to find a way to restore and rebuild Gaza rather than having the U.S. come in and take over and kick out all the Palestinians to get rid of Hamas is the idea. Yeah. But I do wonder with the West Bank if that will be a bigger issue in the coming years because Trump named Mike Huckabee, a former governor, the ambassador.
What does
Israel.
He call West Bank? It's an old biblical
Judea
name.
and Samaria.
Yeah,
because that's the Israeli term for that is not the term that Palestinians or the international community uses. And there's this interesting alliance between American evangelicals and Israel, many of whom want Israel to take over the West Bank. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, these settlements make it almost impossible to see how you're going to have a Palestinian state. So if you just look at a map of the West Bank, the Israeli settlements, they divide Palestinians from Palestinians. They're everywhere. Drawing borders is basically impossible because of how the settlements are structured.
I heard that, I even saw, I forget, but they'll even put like walls or streets, and they do all these like physical redesigns to kind of separate, separate communities and neighborhoods, and so it's I guess it's systematic to a degree, and that's what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, it is a society where it's a very segregated society. The Israelis and Palestinians.
If the U.S. doesn't Gaza will have to be rebuilt. Who will rebuild it? I mean, the Palestinian people don't have. I mean, is it, is it some of the supportive like Iran or I don't know who would rebuild, because it's just rubble right now. I mean, somewhere there has to be an enormous amount of money to rebuild it.
I think we know that Trump is not going to kick in too much money for that,
Yeah.
given his view on foreign aid. I think it's most likely going to have to come from other Arab states. That's where the money will have to come from eventually.
Yeah. So that I think that maybe is why, he just tried to put his developer hat on and just see if he can make a buck. Who knows? Well, speaking of making a buck, let's switch to DOGE. Okay. Yeah. Here's the thing. It was 2 days ago that there was like a meme. There was like a take on the Time magazine cover, and Trump was proclaiming himself king and everything. And there's been a part of me that I wonder if he's more he sees himself as like CEO than king. And the reason is that what he's kind of done when it comes to like allowing Elon Musk and the DOGE team to do what they're doing, that just looks to me like a corporate turnaround. Somebody who comes in, the organizations, sales have been declining, market shares lost. You just bring in somebody that is going to really fix things, and so the slash and burn, cut costs at every juncture, move fast, break things. It seems that's been the playbook, so far. And you make a couple mistakes, but that happens. There's a famous Harvard business school book by Michael Watkins, The First 100 Days, and this just seems just so, it's like all the all the MBA students all learn this about what you need to do that first 100 days to kind of make a mark in an organization, and he's kind of taken that plus 6 Red Bulls and a mouthful of steroids. It's just he's kind of really tackling it that way, and that's kind of what we're seeing is just this. It's just never been done before, but everybody's talked about eliminating waste and fraud, abuse, and that's and he's showing all the all this progress, and I hate to say it, in a way it's kind of hitting the mark in some ways. People wring their hands that U.S. aid is gone and it's only 1% of the budget, and it has all this value outside the U.S., but you don't see that, and now I'm kind of rambling a bit, but they're even floating that they're going to rebate some of the perceived savings back to the taxpayers. That oh man, that it's kind of wild.
Yeah. They're very good at framing, right? Especially that rebate aspect of it. They're good at framing this stuff as being in the interest of the everyday voter, the everyday American, right? It's couched in a lot of populist rhetoric. Interesting thing about the rebate, though, I think if you do the math, I think it'll work out to like $10 or $11 back on your tax return. So that's kind of what all this is doing in the end is
count me in.
That'll get you like a nice coffee nowadays or something. Maybe we could discuss like is running a government the same as running a business? Because I don't think that analogy is perfect. Right? That is what's being done. It seems is he's using. Stuff
I agree with you completely. It's not.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah.
There's a social good versus this isn't like a business. Yeah, that's that. People buy. They buy your product. Or they don't buy your product. The government isn't there just for people purchase. They don't purchase a product. You can't. I don't know how you can't classify defense like that. You can't classify social programs like that. So it's just that it seems so similar to business tactics that I've just seen my whole life in terms of how it's being approached. And I guess the other part, and maybe this is more the political, is that Reagan said the government's the enemy, and I guess they've, now it's really starting to, that there's a full out assault on the enemy, isn't there? It's you're anybody that's there to regulate basically is under attack and being forced out.
Yeah. I think I said this last podcast too. It's actually a laudable goal to try to streamline the bureaucracy, because I think unequivocally, like, you could probably streamline the federal bureaucracy in a variety of ways. I mean, I'm not an expert on this issue area, but it's become like any bureaucracy. It almost takes on a life of its own, and it grows to the point where it's just so much bigger than it was, you know, going back a century or whatever. But the way, like, with what DOGE is doing, like, another difference between running a business and a government, at least a democratic government, is like accountability's got to be a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And DOGE, it's not a cabinet level position.
Right.
No one played any role in nominating, electing Elon Musk. Granted, there are plenty of positions in American government, let's say the chairman of the Federal Reserve, where you play no role in voting that person in, but at least, that's an institution that's created by an act of Congress. Mm-hmm. And, even nominating that position, you still have to go through the Senate. So none of this is being done. And so, like, I don't know, I feel like I'm a broken record nowadays, but I see some of the potential good with some objectives by the Trump administration. I'm not afraid to say that, because sometimes people get caught in the trap of you love Trump and anything he does is good. You hate Trump, anything he does is bad, which I don't think is true. Like, even a broken clock is right twice a day. But the way you can't just throw out democracy when it's convenient for you. That's the line, I would say. So, like, there's a right way to do things. There's a wrong way to do things. There's a right way to streamline the bureaucracy, and then there's a wrong way. And the problem I've had is just it's being done in a very authoritative way. To put it lightly. So,
well, I'll contradict myself in the period of 10 minutes, and he probably isn't a CEO. He is a king, because what's the Napoleon quote that he's
it's like a man who saves his country breaks no law.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to guess it's not even a real Napoleon, so it's probably one of those fake
well,
internet ones.
It's Napoleon Dynamite.
We need a fact check of that. Jayson,
it's Napoleon Dynamite probably who said it. Yeah,
whenever you see somebody online quote some historical figure to give credence to whatever their political point of view is, most of the time the quote is fake. It's like, I would say 90% of the time it's fake. I've seen that many times over the years. There's actually like some pages for like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, just a list of fake quotes that you find on the internet. Explaining like the origins and the provenance of them. But anyway, so it is done in a very, very autocratic way, and there's that saying, move fast and break things, or I think is that from Meta, maybe?
Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg.
From Zuckerberg. And I think Musk is kind of doing that with DOGE, and so that means making a lot of mistakes, and then they have to like kind of backtrack on these mistakes. There was the story the other day about the nuclear missile supervisors or whatever who they fired and had to try to get back.
What could go possibly wrong?
They laid off the some bird flu experts, which is a bad idea right now with bird flu expanding. And it seems like there's not a lot of, it's not being done thoughtfully or carefully, where it seems like they're going after the probationary employees, especially the ones who don't have I guess as many protections, because they're on they're under recently hired, so they don't have the protections you would if you were around longer. And I don't know, some of those people might be doing really important things, but just they're more convenient to go after because they're easier to lay off, and so you end up laying off. The other day too, like I guess temporarily the JFK Presidential Museum and Library shut down because they had to lay off a bunch of employees based on one of Trump's executive orders, and they couldn't keep the museum open anymore. And I don't know, it's not being done thoughtfully or carefully. I think almost anybody would agree that there's way too much bureaucracy in the government, where it's so complicated that almost nobody can understand how to do anything. And that is an issue. Government does not work quickly; it works very slowly, which I guess has pros and cons. And so I'm sure there are ways you can make the government more efficient, but I'm not impressed by the way that Musk is going about it. And Musk also, like, he's just like a troll in a lot of ways. Like, what are his goals? Is it really in the best interest of Americans? Is it in the best interest of himself? If you listen to what he puts on Twitter, it's just like a bunch of conspiracy theory nonsense a lot of the time. It just is out of touch with reality, and that's not somebody I want to be making decisions for how to streamline the government.
Yeah, well, it's all part of this that going that unitary executive theory that seems now to be right there in front of us. That it's just that it's been moving in that direction for years, and the Trump team, they, unlike 2016 where it was kind of like that that clown car, everybody falling out of some some car in the middle of a circus ring. Now they are very well organized and deliberate in terms of what they're doing, and it all seems that it's all geared towards that expansion of executive power, and you got Congress that is just truly playing a back seat. They're acquiescing to everything. So he sees that opening, and he's running through it with a bulldozer.
Yeah, the unitary executive theory was more fringe at one point, but it's come a lot more mainstream in recent years. And I think I'm going to guess Trump has not read a lot of constitutional theory, but people around him probably have.
You can put smart money on that one.
And they're putting, I think, that sort of idea in his head that he should be taking power as a unitary executive. If you look at Article 2 of the Constitution, it really, like I said this last podcast, but it's not very detailed. There's not a whole lot of detail on there. So really, a lot of it is through precedent and practice across time. And there's no mention of departments, and so these departments they exist. They're within the executive branch, but they're not really explicit in the Constitution. And what is mentioned in the Constitution is there will be a president, and that the president is the executive branch. And so I think the interpretation is the unitary executive theory is
everything's under my control.
Yeah, the president should have total control over that branch of government, because he, or maybe one day she, is the one mentioned in the article. But Trump. What was the executive order he signed a few days ago? That's only the president and the attorney general have the right to interpret the law, or something like that. And I think it's for the purposes of the executive branch. He wants a lot more control over the bureaucracy in the government, so they will carry out exactly what he wants without delays, without any kind of opposition within the executive branch. And his argument is that that's democracy. I won the election, so the people voted for me. I should be able to get through what I want. But there are a lot of procedures and practices in place that are, I think, designed in the interest of the American people that are supposed to slow that process down. And there are things that, through precedent, Trump really shouldn't be able to do as the executive, even though in spite of the unitary executive theory. Yeah.
Play this out over like a year from now. How's this? Things will slow down. There's only just so many cuts that you can make. But where's this going to end up in a year or 2 years from now?
Like the government reforms?
Yeah, just what are we going to be looking at as far as the federal government in 2 years? Because I don't. It's like the plan right now is just it's like an action plan without necessarily an end goal, So I don't know where it is they're necessarily going. They're just trying to cut as much as they possibly can. That's about it.
I would guess that the federal budget will be cut a lot less than a lot of Trump supporters think, because it's very hard to cut things, and I'm sure there are people who have jobs that can be streamlined and replaced, and maybe the jobs don't need to exist. But there are a lot of really important jobs that are going to be hard to replace. Right. And I think cutting things saying you're going to cut things is much easier than actually cutting things. Yeah. And as a result, I'm going to guess that a lot less will be cut and eliminated than a lot of people anticipate.
Yeah.
I think he'll try, and I think the courts will slow things down too, because there'll be all these lawsuits about civil service protections and whether or not Trump can remove people under the law, because these agencies are created by Congress. So does Trump have the right to fire people in these agencies if they're created by Congress? And Congress has also passed legislation that gives protection to civil service workers. So all these legal hurdles have to get through too. And that leads to the other danger that people are talking about, is whether or not Trump will just ignore the courts if they rule against him.
Yeah.
So I think overall, I would guess that there will not be anywhere near as much money saved from government reforms as Trump supporters like to believe. And when you factor in what are likely to be pretty substantial tax cuts for a lot of wealthy Americans, I expect the deficit will grow substantially.
It'll balloon
next year and a half, 2 years.
Brendan, you have any thoughts?
I concur. I mean, they'll have a number that they'll be proud of,
right,
whatever number that is.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a way to inflate it just based off of what I've read. I know already the way that they're reporting this on the DOGE website is dishonest, and it's overestimating what's actually been cut so far.
One teeny tiny 80 billion was actually 8 million.
Yeah, so it's like grammatical. I don't even know what you call that, but
slight miss.
Yeah, there'll be a number though, and they'll do the PR stunt. And they'll make it kind of here's what we saved you. But yeah, I'm waiting for the tax cuts to come for the rich.
Yeah.
I think that'll justify tax cuts for the rich. And yeah, in the end, I mean, it's not that's not going to cut into the deficit, not even close. Until you start cutting the military budget.
Hegseth said that that's kind of next, and wherever, but that's like the one of, touching a live wire. So but you don't know. One thing I predict, and this happened to Trump with tariffs in his first administration, is that they're going to make all these cuts, and then they're going to find that there's a lot of core constituencies that are negatively impacted. You get rid of U.S. aid, all of a sudden now there's all these farm states that were selling a whole bunch of food to help other parts of the world, and they're you can't. Do you leave them out in the cold? You get rid of the Department of Education, all of a sudden you find there's all these red states that get a disproportionate amount of their education funding from the department. What are you going to do there? And I think they're going to just find exception after exception, and they could do a hard line. Everybody has to kind of suffer, but that's doesn't necessarily how politics works, and they're going to find that all of a sudden all the different requests are going to start rolling in, and they're going to have a real jumbled mess on their hands.
Yeah, that's probably right. Because people losing their jobs, people who are going to hurt from this reform of the government, it's not going to be universally Democrats. It's going to be some people who are Republicans. Like there are talks of reforming the FBI. The FBI, I'm going to guess, is not a liberal bastion. It's probably got a lot of conservatives in it.
Yeah.
And so that's just one example. Overall, most government workers are probably Democrats or lean to the left to some degree, but certainly not all. And you might have a case, too, where if you're talking about people who are losing jobs at, say, national parks, and the quality of services at the Grand Canyon, let's say, begins to decline.
Right.
Visitors to the Grand Canyon are going to become all different political backgrounds. That's something that they could notice. So there are ways that will affect people well beyond. It could affect people in a way that will hurt Trump's popularity in the long run. But yeah, as we're talking about like actually saving money, this will be, I think, very minimal. The DOGE effort will probably save some amount of money. It won't be zero, because people, if you're cutting jobs, the spending will probably go down. So the spending will go down. But if you want to really make a dent in the American budget, it is the military. And then there's also Social Security, and there's Medicare, Medicaid. And I don't think Trump wants to touch most of those. That's going to be... there are certainly some Republicans in Congress who do, but Trump has been a little bit more savvy about trying to stay away from Social Security and social Medicare, Medicaid, which are overall pretty popular with the American public. Yeah. And unless you cut one of those substantially, you're not really going to be saving a lot of money. Yeah, that is where most of the federal budget goes.
But so much press and attention came to the cuts going through now that the perception will be that there were that there was a lot of significant savings, even though it ended up not being there. I mean, it's great messaging, I guess.
And the drain the swamp mentality, right? Yeah. Like a very populist kind of way of framing it, but it's not. Draining the swamp is not an accurate way to put it, because most of these federal jobs are not in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
I don't know the number, but the large majority of them are outside of Washington, D.C.
Virginia, Maryland.
And sometimes they're in apolitical stuff like the National Park Service. Right. So, I'll give my last hot take of the day, but I also don't think the budget is a problem. I think it's been at least overstated. Since I've been in college, we've been talking about the U.S. being bankrupt and going broke, and it's never become a big problem. And there's a reason for that. It's because the U.S. is not a business. It's a government. Yeah. It can print money, and because it can print money, it could pay off any debts it wants. And because of that, investors don't lose confidence in the dollar or the U.S. government as a place to invest. So,
well, we'll leave on that hot take now. Let's try a prediction. You're a hockey guy, yes?
I am a hockey guy.
Canada or the U.S.? What do you think?
I played it safe with the last pick when I said the Chiefs, and I was wrong.
Yeah, there was one of us that was right. I can't recall. Oh, it was me.
Did you pick the Chiefs too?
I did, yeah. Okay. Well, I think what I said was the Eagles are better on paper. The Chiefs just seem like they can't lose. So I went against what was my better judgment. And
now, one of us clearly just definitively said the Eagles. That's
okay.
So.
Yeah. Wasn't
Congratulations.
Me. All right, U.S. Canada. What do you think?
I'll go USA, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you follow hockey at all?
I do, not as closely as Brendan. Yeah. But I'm going to go Canada because Canada always seems to edge us in any kind of international competition in hockey.
There you go.
Yeah. Have you checked the betting odds? Are they the favorite? Probably, right?
I haven't looked.
USA's kind of beat up. They beat Canada last time, but I think Canada's favored. That's the
Yeah, it just seems like there have been so many times in international competition where the U.S. has gotten close to beating Canada in whatever tournament it is, and U.S. just doesn't. In the Olympics, last time the U.S. won the gold medal in hockey, I think was 1980, the famous Miracle on Ice. It's been a long time, and women's hockey hasn't done much better. So,
well, I'll predict the USA because I am an American.
There we go.
Proud to be an American.
Well, Canada could be part of the U.S. soon, too, so you never know.
Got a British loyalist here.
Yeah. For Canada. Yeah.
Well, real good. Well, thank you, guys. Great. It was great show, and thanks. You for listening to As the World Turns or Burns. We come to you every other week, and we like to try and have a lively talk and some definite hot takes, right?
Always hot takes.
Always hot
takes with
the
Professor
hottest
Connell.
of hot takes. And so, where can you find our podcast? You can find it on any major streaming platform. Cheyenne, how many places can they find our podcast? Do you have a percent or a number in mind?
No, not really. I just know of TikTok and YouTube.
Oh my goodness! We'll work on that reply, but it's basically everywhere. But one great thing is if you watch this show and you liked it, please subscribe. If you really liked it, we would like to get a review. Now, Cheyenne, you can recover on this one. All right. How many stars do we ask for?
5 out of 5.
Oh, see that she's an all-star through and through. So thank you again for listening to us, and we hope you listen to us again 2 weeks from now. Take care. Bye.
This podcast is sponsored in part by Lyon College and KILT Studios. Thank you to Jonah Winter for the intro and outro music.